A pregnant woman lay bleeding on the sidewalk, her scream still echoing through the neighborhood, as two self-appointed HOA officers stood over her, silent, unapologetic. They weren't real cops, but they wore badges, and they shoved her anyway. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. They say you never truly know rage until you watch the person you love, your pregnant wife, bleeding on the pavement while two smug cowards stand over her, acting like they've just enforced some sacred law. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury so deep it made my vision blur. I knelt beside Hannah, her body curled protectively around her stomach, breath shallow, eyes wide with pain and confusion. Blood trickled from her nose into the cracks of the concrete. Her voice was barely audible, just a trembling, "The baby? Mark! Is the baby okay?" Dean and Travis stood a few feet back, hands on their hips, like they were proud of what they'd done. Their stupid little HOA vests looked like something from a costume bin. One of them even had a fake badge pinned to his chest. Travis still had his hand half raised, as if expecting to be saluted. Dean? He looked bored, like this was just another Wednesday. He actually smirked. That was the moment something inside me fractured. "You put your hands on a pregnant woman," I said, rising slowly. My voice shook. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. The weight behind the words made the air around us vibrate. "You assaulted my wife." Dean rolled his eyes. "She got aggressive. We're authorized to de-escalate threats." "She was taking in the trash," I snapped, pointing to the still rolling bin on its side. "And you're not authorized to touch anyone. You're not cops. You're just two middle-aged men with clipboards and power fantasies." Neighbors were gathering now. Mrs. Atkins from across the street, Mr. Bell in his robe, even the teenage kid from the corner house. Eyes widened. Phones came out. I could hear someone dialing 911. Dean and Travis started fidgeting. "She fell," Travis insisted, though his voice cracked slightly. "No," I growled. "You shoved her. I saw it, and so did half the damn block." Behind me, Hannah was still trembling, trying to sit up. "Mark," she whispered. "Don't. Just stay with me." I crouched again, brushing the blood from her cheek with my sleeve. "I'm right here," I said. "They're not touching you again." Sirens were already faint in the distance, but they weren't fast enough. Because in those agonizing minutes before help arrived, something burned into me permanently. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a violation. One that wouldn't be solved with an apology or a fine from the HOA. Something darker was at play here. Unchecked power in small hands, inflated by fear and masculinity and the illusion of control. And I swore, as I held my wife's hand in the blood-stained light of that quiet, ordinary afternoon, that this would not go unanswered. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and disappointment. Hannah lay beneath thin fluorescent light, her hospital gown loose over her belly, the monitor's soft beeping charting our daughter's heartbeat like a lifeline. I sat beside her, holding her hand, still trembling, still warm, but her eyes stared past me, through me, like I was part of the wall. Shock hadn't left her yet. It clung to her like static, invisible but always humming. The doctor had said the baby was fine. "No signs of distress," she told us, like that alone could undo the violence of the fall, the terror that lived in Hannah's chest now. Her nose was bandaged, and the swelling on her forehead had already darkened into a deep, mottled bruise. But those were just the parts you could see. The real injury was internal, not just to her, to us. I tried to talk to her, to bring her back with little things, a joke, a memory, her favorite song playing low from my phone. But she just stared ahead, murmuring fragments. "He pushed me. They looked proud. No one stopped them. And the worst, what if this had happened when I was alone?" That night, the precinct buzzed with apathy. I gave my statement to an officer who typed with one hand and drank gas station coffee with the other. He nodded, said the words they're trained to say. "We'll look into it. It's complicated. Let the process play out." But when I asked about arrests, charges, he leaned back like I'd asked for a personal favor. "Look, it's her word against theirs," he said. "There's no footage. They're saying she came at them. You know how these things go." I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because screaming gets ignored just as easily as whispering. Later, I saw the incident report. 2 printed pages, a checklist, some boxes marked "alleged contact." Language so drained of urgency, it might as well have described a noise complaint. And as for the HOA, their public statement read like it was written by a soulless AI. "We value our residents and strive to foster a respectful environment." Not a single name, not a single mention of what really happened. Dean and Travis were back on patrol the next day, riding their absurd little golf cart past our house like kings surveying their lawn. That's when Hannah cracked. Not in some theatrical movie scene breakdown. She simply folded inward, silent, tight, still, like she was packing the pain into a box she didn't know how to open. And all I could do was sit there, one arm around her shoulder, the other hand gripping the blue hospital folder they gave us. Discharge instructions, follow-ups, paper bandages on a gaping wound. I'd never hated red tape so much in my life. The morning light outside Hannah's office cut hard through the glass like a scalpel. Sharp, clear, surgical. She stood beneath it, not like a victim, but like a weapon being drawn. Her face was still marked, the bruise on her brow yellowing at the edges, a fading relic of violence. But in her eyes, there was no fade, only focus. Purpose with edges. She didn't sit when she got in. She didn't sip coffee or greet the interns. She went straight to work. Her office, neat as ever, was already stacked with files and folders she'd compiled herself, not from courtesy or convenience, but because trust now came with a high price. At the top was her own handwritten case strategy, pages layered with legal statutes and annotations. 18 U.S. Code, SAR 912, impersonation of a federal officer. 18 U.S. Code, FAR 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, a case not built on outrage, but on precision. Each note was a blade, each statute a hammer. She began calling neighbors personally, confirming timelines, gathering statements, documenting prior incidents. Several of them had been harassed, too, warned, intimidated, even threatened by Dean and Travis under the same false authority. Some had been too afraid to report. Now they were angry, galvanized. Witnesses were willing, stories aligned. And then Hannah filed. Not with local police. Not with the city. She walked her evidence into the U.S. Attorney's office and filed a formal request for prosecution under federal jurisdiction. Because this wasn't a neighborhood squabble, it was criminal impersonation and rights violations under federal law. The marshals didn't knock when they came. They didn't call ahead. They swept up Dean and Travis like garbage on a windless street. The 2 men were in handcuffs before they could spin their favorite story. Their faces, red with disbelief, were plastered across local news sites within the hour. One headline read like justice etched in steel. HOA vigilantes charged in federal case after assault on pregnant prosecutor. That same day, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Lawyers flew in. Retainers were scrambled. Because what Hannah had exposed wasn't just misconduct, it was liability. The Compliance Patrol had never been authorized by official vote, nor documented in any charter. Dean and Travis had been operating under the illusion of power, and that illusion had just shattered. And Hannah? She didn't gloat. She didn't rage. She stood before a wall of law books and breathed slowly for the first time in days. Her strength didn't come from revenge. It came from reclamation. This wasn't about just punishing two men. It was about reasserting truth in a world that had tried to bend it. She hadn't just fought back. She reset the balance. The courtroom had been a theater of reckoning. From the moment the prosecution presented the doorbell footage, grainy but unmistakable, the momentum was irreversible. The jury's expressions hardened as they watched Dean shove Hannah, a visibly pregnant woman, to the pavement. Gasps echoed when Travis's hand clamped around her arm in the seconds before. The stillness afterward was dense, charged, almost sacred. There was no ambiguity. No spin could sanitize what they had done. The defense tried. They threw words like misunderstanding, community standards, and overreaction into the air like confetti, hoping some of it might stick. But the truth was a blade, clean, cold, and merciless. The prosecution carved through every excuse with precision. Witness after witness stood tall. Neighbors who'd once stayed silent out of fear now told the court how they too had been harassed, stalked, or threatened by the fake enforcers. One woman broke down recounting how Dean had followed her son home from the park for riding a scooter too fast. When the verdict was read, the silence that followed was louder than applause. Guilty, on all counts. Dean sat slack-jawed, disbelief draining the color from his face. 5 years. Travis slumped into his chair, sentenced to 3. The courtroom didn't cheer. This wasn't celebration. It was consequence. And in that consequence, a neighborhood breathed again. The HOA board tried damage control, but the damage was structural. The president resigned within hours of the verdict. The board held a vote, open to the public for the first time in years, and passed a sweeping ban on any kind of community enforcement unless sanctioned and supervised by local law enforcement. The patrol was disbanded, the golf cart sold, and the vests, symbols of counterfeit power, shredded like expired warrants. But the true reckoning came not in handcuffs or courtroom statements. It came in a quiet hospital room, 2 weeks later. Grace Collins entered the world just after midnight, lungs strong, eyes searching. She was tiny, swaddled in pink, but her arrival felt monumental. Hannah, holding her close, traced a finger along the curve of Grace's cheek, her voice steady but soft. "This," she whispered, "is what justice looks like." The scar on her forehead had faded, but the memory remained. Not as a source of trauma, but as proof. Proof that resilience isn't born in the absence of pain, but in the decision to rise through it. From a cracked sidewalk to a judge's gavel, Hannah never yielded. She didn't just win. She redefined what it means to stand.